Welcome, everyone. We are very happy to have you here at Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Crypto and Criminal Law. This program is put on by the Criminal Law section of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. My name is Nina Marino. I'm going to be your moderator today. I am thrilled to have this panel. The people that we have put together for this program, it's incredible. So let me tell you who we have, and then I'll give you a little bit of an overview as to how we're going to proceed, and then we'll jump right in. So we have with us today Puneet Kakkar. Puneet, give us a wave. There he is. Puneet is an assistant United States attorney in Los Angeles. He is currently on assignment as the resident legal advisor for the Gulf region in the Middle East and is based in the United States Embassy in Kuwait. You know what time it is there now? It's late, but Puneet is here nevertheless, and we thank him. He is responsible right now for working with partner governments such as Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Bahrain on counterterrorism and strengthening capacities to combat illicit finance, including, most importantly for today, in the cyber realm. At the United States Attorney's Office, he was most recently the Deputy Chief of the International Narcotics and Money Laundering Unit, supervising prosecutors, serving as the Digital Currency Coordinator for the office, and overseeing investigations involving the dark web, which we're going to talk about today, trade-based money laundering, customs fraud, and cryptocurrency money laundering, all of which we're going to talk about today. He was on the team that dismantled Wall Street Market, the largest darknet marketplace at the time. He charged cryptocurrency money laundering cases, including the first federal case involving a Bitcoin ATM, and prosecuted other violations of fraud, the Bank Secrecy Act, and drugs. Thank you for being here, Puneet. We also have with us the fabulous Keri Axel, hailing from Pasadena, right, Keri? Yep.
Yes, working from home in Pasadena.
There we go. So Keri is a former federal prosecutor and an SEC enforcement staff attorney. She regularly represents clients in investigations by state and federal agencies, including the DOJ, SEC, CFPB, and FTC. Keri also represents executives, entrepreneurs, and financial services professionals and companies in FINRA matters and civil litigation. Her firm, Waymaker, LLP, has a strong fintech practice, and has represented many prominent blockchain companies and entrepreneurs in criminal and SEC investigations. Welcome, Keri.
Thank you, Nina.
And last but certainly not least, we have Anna Winningham. Anna is a former special agent for the FBI. During her tenure, she was promoted to supervisory special agent. She is Risk Control Strategies Executive VP, and she leads RCS. So many letters today, everybody. RCS's investigations and cyber practice. Her efforts provide clients critical expertise in response to threats, cyber compromises, and litigation. She has managed breach response investigations and mitigation, closely worked with clients, technical staff, and legal counsel. Over the past 28 years, she's testified on matters before state and federal criminal and civil courts. She has served as an expert witness regarding employee wrongdoing, digital forensic investigations, network security, and workplace violence. Anna has a bachelor's degree from UT in El Paso. She's a military veteran, having served in the U.S. Army, and was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. Welcome, Anna, and thank you for your service.
Thank you. My pleasure.
So we are going to have program materials distributed to all panelists. They're very, very cool, actually. We've got this really cool 83-page manual from the Attorney General. We've got a pretty interesting criminal information. That'll all be shared to all the panelists. You'll get that. You will get your CLE, your MCLE proof within 24 hours. We're going to do questions at the end, everybody. So I'll leave about 10 minutes. If you have questions, just put them in the little chat, and we will try to respond to as many of those as we can. So, if this was a normal face-to-face program, I could just say to everybody, what's everyone's skill level? What's everyone's comfort level? And everyone would raise their hand, like, who knows about cryptocurrency? And people would raise their hand. Who knows about the blockchain? Who knows about the Darknet? I can't do that. So I have no idea. There's about 100 people here. I have no idea who knows what. So in an abundance of caution, since we don't know that fundamental question, the answer to that fundamental question, we're going to sort of lay the foundation first. We're going to do and just sort of lay the groundwork. And we're going to start with basic questions. And for those of you that know all of this, forgive me, it's going to be about 10 minutes. But for those of you that don't, it's super important, because otherwise nothing else is going to make any sense. So we're going to answer some fundamental questions. What is crypto? What's it used for? What's the Darknet? Puneet, why don't you lead us off? What is crypto?
Sure.
What's the
Thank
blockchain?
you.
What are we talking about?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. First, I actually want to just thank everyone for participating. And I want to thank the Beverly Hills Bar Association for sponsoring this, and Nina for putting us together. I also need to start with the standard disclaimer that everyone loves hearing, which is, although I am currently part of the Department of Justice, the views that I express may not necessarily be that of the department. And that applies whether I'm in the territorial United States or not. So that out of the way, I think, there's three salient points that I think we can all work on for an operating assumption for cryptocurrency. One, it's a virtual representation of value. It's not something that exists physically. It is something what a community of people and participants say it is, and say what you have. That's the first, I think, best way to understand cryptocurrency. The second would be that it is sustained by a community and not backed by any one government. So it's decentralized. It relies on a community to perpetuate the technology, which is the blockchain technology, so that everyone using it can see everyone's values. And they're the ones who enforce it. If you want to send cryptocurrency from one person to another, the community looks at that publicly accessible blockchain, or whatever accessible way that blockchain is, to enforce it. And it's not one government. And then the third aspect is there is an anonymous component to it. Unlike traditional means of money that is backed and centralized by a government, when we talk about cryptocurrency generally, we are talking about public addresses or some identifier that doesn't necessarily tell you who is using it. So I think that, for the purposes of today's discussion, are the three characteristics of cryptocurrency. The video gamer in me, which is why I have a headset, would love to talk about Warcraft Gold and that being a digital representation. But I think for today, we can keep it to these three principles. So that said, while I always love starting with the positive and the legitimate use, I guess my perspective is the concerns about the illegitimate use. And so to be clear, I understand that there are positive uses of cryptocurrency and positive advances of technology, for which I know Keri is going to elaborate, but I'll just describe the illicit concerns, or the concerns about illicit use of cryptocurrency. And I think it's drawing from two of the components that I was describing. One is the decentralized nature, and that there is no one authority collecting information or governing information about it. And two, that there is an anonymous nature of cryptocurrency, and that you don't know. These two aspects of cryptocurrency give rise to a series of concerns to prosecutors and law enforcement around the world. The first that I know Anna will talk about is the Darknet. The Darknet itself is a technological concept of hiding your computers and your networks. And because of that, there are people who choose to sell drugs, services such as hitmen, child pornography on the Darknet. And the way the currency of choice on the Darknet is cryptocurrency because of that anonymous nature and lack of central authority. The second is cryptocurrency is used as a means to launder money, in that it is a way to hide money from illicit gains. This first began in the public consciousness in terms of the Darknet, but even in the past year with COVID fraud, if we can remember that day in last March, when we couldn't buy masks, couldn't buy N95s as easy as you could get on Costco, which ships to Kuwait actually, people were selling fake cryptocurrency and fake N95 masks, getting cash or whatever and stashing it in crypto. It was a way to hide money. It was a savvier, safer way to put cash under your mattress. And then the last way that I would highlight an illegal part of cryptocurrency is terror finance. And this is incredibly serious around the world. There are several terror groups that have used encrypted communication forms such as Telegram to fundraise for causes. In the past year, the Department of Justice has brought enforcement actions against terror groups such as the Syrian Mujahideen, raising money in Bitcoin or Monero around the world. And at least in one such action, the department had laid out over 150 different donors. And this is consistent with terror finance across the board. In the States, you have small amounts that are sent. Initially it was cash, then it evolved to fintech and crowdsourcing funding, and now we're seeing it happening in the cryptocurrency realm. And so those are the illegal concerns. Anytime you have any representation of value, you have concerns about hiding criminal assets and furthering criminal activity, whether it be gold, watches, cars. Now, cryptocurrency is one aspect of that. I will, in advance, preempt one discussion point that I know will be said is there's a vibrant debate about what is the percentage of illicit use of cryptocurrency. Industry reports will say, self-servingly in my perspective, that it's decreasing. And so that debate can be saved for another day. I think none of that militates against the fact that it can be used illegally, and the fact that it has been used illegally, and the fact that there is potential for such nefarious purposes like child pornography and terror finance should at least draw some concerns and unify one common perspective, which is that it needs to be regulated appropriately. So like any other way that we regulate means of value, it doesn't get in those hands or further those purposes. So there, I hope that's a high level view about cryptocurrency and the illicit perspectives that catch the attention of governments and law enforcement. Thank you.
So before I know, Anna, I know that you did look at the percentage of crypto used for criminal activity recently. But before we jump, actually, why don't you tell us that? That probably segues well.
Okay.
And then, Keri, if you can circle back, since now Puneet has painted such a dark picture, perhaps you can illuminate us as to the legal, the positive uses of
right.
But to you, Anna, first.
Okay, so on the, if you're looking at, first of all, the anonymity of cryptocurrency and the ability to hide transactions through multiple different ways of getting and trading cryptocurrency does make it almost impossible to tell you exactly how much was spent on criminal illicit things. It's like asking how long is a piece of thread. However, I did find one, I think it was an article in Forbes that was using a 2021 China analysis report that came up with the figure of 2019, only 2.1% of the total amount of cryptocurrency was used for criminal activity, which represented $21.4 billion. 2020, the figure was much lower, and it's down below 0.5% at 0.34%, which is about 10 billion. Still billions with B's, still a lot of money. The representation there is, I was even telling, I go, yeah, but I really don't think they're taking into account the whole peer-to-peer. There's many different ways that you can collect Bitcoin or other Monero. He mentioned Monero, that you should know. I believe there's almost 1,700 different types of cryptocurrency that you can go out and are publicly traded. That's not even the cryptocurrency that is not publicly traded, that's specific within a group. But Bitcoin and Monero are among the top ones. And those are the ones that are used on the Darknet to purchase things. So there's a lot left out of that. Those numbers that you're hearing, that seems just really, really, really low, and that you should easily be diverted to other types of law enforcement or other types of criminal activities. But the big two are terrorism and money laundering. Those are the two that are definitely, you're not going to be able to see that type of transaction, that type of cleaning using traditional means and looking at transactions, because you don't have access to those. You do if you're in the group, it's very transparent, but you don't if you're not a member, which is something that I think is important to remember.
Yeah, you can't measure what you don't see. Is
right.
The point. But Keri, tell us what we do see.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to the question in the chat that says, what is a blockchain? And
I was going to answer that, but
and with apologies to my clients who will say that I'm completely butchering the technology here, I'll do the best I can, though. I actually had an entrepreneur say, in a deposition, you keep referring to this as a project or a business. It's a piece of software. And I come back to that. The blockchain is a piece of software. What people are designing is using cryptography, which is where I get lost and don't actually understand all the details. But using cryptography, they're using a verifiable process where they're creating a distributed ledger that is the blockchain, and each block builds on each other and is distributed. It's generally decentralized, but not always. And they build a piece of software in order to launch a new technology. And so most of the people we represent have been really entrepreneurs who have a new idea about how blockchain can be used, for good, for some sort of new tech project. And if you start Googling many of the top, you're calling them cryptocurrencies, but projects out there, they are real innovations in the space. One that comes to mind that, we don't represent and everybody well knows is Ethereum. And, Ethereum is not just Ether, which is the cryptocurrency that you might say the cryptocurrency affiliated with it. The SEC now, and we generally use the word, digital asset or token. And the tokens affiliated with Ethereum are Ether. And Ether is valuable because Ethereum is a piece of software that exists, that's open source, that anybody can build on. There was just recent news that Vitalik Buterin is worth however many $1 billion. He doesn't own Ethereum. Ethereum is managed by a foundation which he's affiliated with. Obviously, as one of the original founders, he owns a lot of Ethereum. But Ethereum as a software is an open source software that's out there that anybody can build on. And you need the Ether to run the transactions on the software, which is why Ether then retains its value. So, we go away from the term cryptocurrency because in an economist's view, a cryptocurrency is a currency is a store of value and a medium of exchange, provides either of those two things. And most of the digital assets these days don't function much as a medium of exchange outside of their own platform. Ether is publicly traded. It's pretty liquid. But a lot of the ones that you're talking about aren't very liquid, and not that many people own them or trade them. I will also speak to the anonymity component because it is really important and will feature later in what law enforcement's real concerns are in this area and why, as Puneet touched on. But just to make it clear, it's anonymous in terms of ownership. You can't tell who owns something. But because the blockchain is a distributed ledger and most of these projects are open source and public, you literally can run block explorer programs and see the movement all the way across. I'm sure that Puneet has seen the same software I have that works amazingly. And you just see this huge grid of where, each wallet address and how it's moving, and the software can cluster wallet addresses. You see the money moving. You could not do that with cash. So the ownership is anonymous, but in fact, the movement of the money is not. So you have to think about it more like cash, but cash that you can trace. And of course, it was a major step forward in anti-money laundering, that we had worldwide regimes of anti-money laundering laws, know your customer laws, and that those were, internationally enforced, and the use of cash to circumvent money laundering went way down. So now you sort of have a new form of cash, and we're in this bubble then about how does that get regulated, and how do you enforce conventional laws on that space, and where is it appropriate and not?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting point, Keri, because I always take issue on the anonymity is such a big deal, but it's true. Other than the bulk of carrying a duffel bag of cash, if I take it from point A to point B, no one's going to know, but they'll always know where my money's going, my crypto is going on the blockchain. So let's pivot slightly, since we were just talking about the anonymity and two different kind of views on anonymity. Let's talk about the Darknet, which not many people really understand what the Darknet is, and how anonymity is relevant in terms of Darknet transactions. And Anna, you can lead us through that.
Yeah, right. So the easiest way to do that is for me to, being from Southern California, is to use the ocean. So just go with the ocean. You're up on the top of the ocean, and you can see probably, good 5-10 feet before it gets a little greeny and you can't see too much, maybe shapes. That's the surface. That's what all of us kind of know and use every single day. The World Wide Web, as we see it, is this 10-foot level, which we graciously, because I remember the days when this didn't exist, you can graciously go around and find whatever you want using a multitude of browsers that pick up on indexing, string text searches and stuff that allow you to actually go into Google and search, what's the level of criminal use of cryptocurrency, and then 15 articles pop up. So that's all searchable. And then if you go to that 10-foot, 12-foot, 20-foot level, now you're getting into the deep web. And the deep web is something that if you were on the ocean, to get there, you'd have to use something else, breathing apparatus, a snorkel, something along those lines. It's usually knowledge about where you need to go or username and password type of thing. And I'll give you a classic example of what people don't even realize is basically the deep web. And that's, those pages that are unique to you on Netflix that talks about, that this is what you're watching, blah, blah, blah. It's unique to you. Amazon has them as well. Those aren't indexed and therefore not searchable content that will come up for anybody using the regular surface net. However, they're still available. You can still find them if you have your user account is activated. So that's a good explanation of how the deep web is, unlike the dark web. So just think dark side, so you never get the two D's confused. Dark side. Now you're really down deep, and you can't even see down there unless you have a unique little vehicle that you can charge around in it, right? Breathing and all that stuff. And they got little funky lights on it. That tool is the Tor browser. And actually, that's actually a Firefox, an encrypted version of Firefox, which is pretty cool because we all use Firefox. I hope you guys use Firefox. It's a good browser. Now you're down below and you're searching for things that everything down there has a .onion address. I don't know why they picked onion. That just doesn't make sense to me. Why not carrot? Or I don't know that answer, but it's all .onion. And to search there, you need a special vessel, which is Tor or some other type of tool like that, that's using a Tor window to find these markets and find what you're looking for. There are places you can search that on the regular web that'll tell you, where these markets are and what the names of them are, or look for forums or other things that you might have of interest. But that's basically how the deep and the dark web work. There's a lot of uniqueness. The dark web is part of the deep web, but the deep web doesn't necessarily mean you have the dark web in it. Does that make sense? It's kind of unique in that you've got to have a little bit more tools, a little bit more hard work to get there. It's not easy.
Once you're
And
there, though,
dangerous. I should mention dangerous. Every article I've ever read on it talks about be very, very afraid of the dark. And there is a reason why, although it is used very legitimately for good processes and good purposes.
yeah, that's the point I just wanted you to make. That
Yeah.
there's
Yeah,
legitimate
an example of that is people who live in difficult, oppressive regimes are able to still communicate. You can read BBC News from the Tor browser. That's important stuff.
Right. So I can't help myself. I have to look at the question. So I have looked at the question, and there was a question about tumblers. And so since we're talking about the the dark web, Puneet, why don't you just explain how tumblers makes your job more difficult but not impossible?
Sure. So tumblers, it's basically for everyone. It is the concept of what Keri and Nina and Anna were talking about, that on the blockchain software, which will disclose a transaction from an address A to address B, a tumbler is a service in which someone who is sending value can choose to use a tumbler. That tumbler will take intended value that is meant to be sent amongst multiple users and mix it all up and send it to the destination. So rather than me going to Wells Fargo to deliver money, I'm going to a courier who's going to collect cash from a whole bunch of people and mix up the cash and take it to different Wells Fargo banks. That essentially is a tumbler. FinCEN in its last guidance articulated that tumblers are money services businesses. They are subject to money laundering requirements and regulations. And, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but they are like any money remitting business that we are accustomed to. So that's what a tumbler is. It frustrates that purpose that Keri outlined in terms of a singular transaction. There are mechanisms and algorithms to overcome it. In fact, we used some of those techniques to identify the location of Wall Street Market, which was a darknet marketplace. It was a server in a bunker, in a former NATO bunker in Germany. And tumblers allowed us to locate some of the users and the movement of money. So it is possible, but it takes a little bit more work to get there.
So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about Superman 29. I want to talk about all that. But before we get there, let's go a little more broad before we drill down more specifically. Who wants to jump in on some criminal enterprises that function or facilitate by means of cryptocurrency?
I'll take the easy one, which is ransomware. So you've got these guys who gain access to whatever network or whatever server or whatever data, and then they encrypt it, which is basically a form of corruption. So there's a couple of things you can do with data. Bad things, theft, leakage, or corruption. And encryption is basically corruption in that you can't use it anymore as the owner. You need a key. Well, the safe way for those guys to get paid is through cryptocurrency transactions. So that's probably the most common from a criminal perspective on a worldwide methodology besides the markets would be facilitating ransomware payments.
I can give another example in addition to the darknet, and I can briefly describe that too. Elder fraud. This was an unfortunate epidemic where the elderly, particularly in immigrant communities, are called saying that their identity has been stolen, or there has been a quote unquote claim filed on their social security number. And unless they remit money, this case will proceed and they will lose all their social security benefits. And the mechanism by which these scammers are requiring the elderly to pay them is through cryptocurrency. Because one note about cryptocurrency is you can create a new address for every time you want to accept payment. Unlike your traditional bank account, where you have one account number and that stays with you in perpetuity of the existence of that account, I can create a transaction-specific cryptocurrency address. So savvier criminals will then create new addresses for new victims to make it harder for law enforcement to cluster or to follow these transactions. And so there is a significant series of elder fraud scams that happened using cryptocurrency as the means of payment and as the requirement of payment, which is a different flavor of the ransomware demand, but one where it duped elder people to think that because cryptocurrency was the advanced way of paying, these people must have been serious about asking for the money to address their social security, jeopardy to their social security accounts.
I actually never thought about it in terms of elder abuse.
Right.
How do they
I can tell you exactly how it's done. What they do is they will call and they will say, walk to your bank account, and they will give them instructions on withdrawing money. They will direct them to go, for example, to a Bitcoin kiosk, colloquially known as an ATM. Some ATMs do not take identifying information. Those violate the law from the perspective of AML programs. So the elder victim is on the phone saying, what do I do now? They put in $2,999, $1 less than $3,000 threshold for money services business. They get a cryptocurrency address and they will send it to whoever they're talking to on the phone. And it is unfortunate, and this has definitely happened on repeated occasions.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think we're all pretty familiar with, our grandparents or our parents getting that call. And every time you're like, oh, please don't, do anything. But this is really a whole different level. Keri, what do you think? What's your experience in criminal behavior in this space?
I think Puneet's last example kind of points to something we discussed in preparation, which was that you're seeing many of the same types of fraud cases, but just with now, a cryptocurrency wrinkle to them. So this, elder abuse kind of case, the FTC did just put out a warning about cryptocurrency being used in a variety of different kind of fraud cases. I mean, as we said, and sometimes in an investment scheme, it can also be like we talked about the new gold or the new coal.
Yeah.
People who are not particularly savvy in this space, and elderly people are often not, just hear something and think it's the new hot thing, and they can be easily defrauded. Here it seems like, it's the old Social Security advanced fee scheme, but they just use, money. They just use cryptocurrency to make it harder to trace. In the investment scheme, they may be using more the term, the cryptocurrency, to just make somebody think it's a unique and a new successful project and might be the next Bitcoin or Ethereum. But a lot of the types of fraud cases, in fact, I checked before this panel, the SEC website, just to see their new cases. Seemed like they were mostly of the variety of a typical fraud scheme, just with a cryptocurrency hook of some kind.
Right.
And so NFTs are the new hot thing. What are you seeing in terms of NFTs and bad conduct in terms of crypto?
I haven't seen any yet, but I see the question and answer in the panel. And I think just for the reasons we just said, Chuck, you're exactly right. I think that could be the next thing where somebody sees these huge amounts of money getting poured into an NFT and thinks, well, I'll just, launch an NFT. At the end of the day, it's the false representation a value that's really the scam. It's a typical misrepresentation, but it's in this different area where, you know, people seem willing to just throw money at it. So I agree. It seems like perhaps the next fraud scam could be there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, we're seeing use of crypto and Ponzi schemes.
Yeah.
You know, misrepresentation, raising money for X, you're raising crypto instead of cash. And at the end of the day, there's really nothing, there is no X. So I think that's right, Keri. I think, and like Puneet said, it's an old scam, but now it's being executed sort of on a different platform or with a different mechanism.
Just for explanation, that NFT refers to a non-fungible
Token.
non-fungible tracking or non-fungible token. Yeah, so it's basically taking a real thing like a painting and representing it as a token or a piece of cyber that supposedly that's what you're purchasing when you get that. But there can be a lot of fraud with that because it's never really backed by that, or it's just plain old fraud. I mean, it has nothing really to do with crypto whatsoever. It's just the act of bait and switch. Although there is a legitimate, semi-legitimate way of looking at NFTs, it's more like a collector type of thing. But yeah, actually,
I think with a bunch of lawyers, I think we all look at each other and we're like, NFT, like, you know, we're lawyers. That makes 0 sense to us. 0 cents. That's why we're lawyers. So let me punt this one to Puneet. You had previously mentioned unlicensed money services businesses. I know that you've prosecuted these cases. This ties directly into money laundering. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So, you know, I think the last discussion that we talked about, you know, just that this is a new way of committing fraud. In the end, criminals want the quote unquote real value. They have a digital representation, but at some point, somebody's going to need to convert it to legal tender to either buy arms and ammunition or to fund illicit purposes, trafficking, whatever it may be, drugs, etc. And so one mechanism by which the government has, in order to capture and to shine light on the dark aspects of these transactions, is by prosecuting those people who are exchanging cryptocurrency for fiat currency, which is your dollar, your yen, whatever it may be. And the statute by which it is done is 18 United States Code 1960, which criminalizes 3 different things. One, a business that is a money transmitting business that is not properly registered with the state. Second, one that is not registered with the federal government, if it is so required. Or third, one that is remitting money that are illicit proceeds, even if registered. That's one avenue in which we have prosecuted that. The second is, even if you are registered or not, whether you are complying with AML obligations. And both of these statutes share one assumption, that the government has extended the prior definitions and regulations that apply to exchange companies, money remitting businesses such as wallahs and banks, to crypto exchange institutions. And this came from FinCEN in 2013, reaffirmed in 2019 and 2020, basically saying that those who exchange, and when I say those, it could be people, it could be mixers, it could be brick and mortar or virtual brick and mortar businesses that exchange fiat currency for businesses, for regular fiat currency for virtual currency, are deemed money services businesses. And therefore, all the laws and regulations applicable to them also apply. And those are the 2 chief criminal implications, 1960 and Title 31 of the United States Code. You know, as a separate note, courts have also deemed the transfer of virtual currency to be a transfer of funds. So it also falls subject to the case law of money laundering, title code Title 18, United States Code 1956. That's the panoply of criminal enforcement tools. This is highlighted in the cryptocurrency enforcement framework that Nina highlighted that's been made available. And so at least in the Central District, as a prosecutor, you can't necessarily find out where some of these crypto transactions are happening. The ownership, as Keri greatly said, the ownership is anonymous. But at some point, whoever does own that funds will want to convert them to real money. And so by focusing on that inflection point, that allowed law enforcement to see who is servicing those illicit actors. These tended to be people, businesses, machines that were asking for higher than market commission rates for exchanges and not complying with Bank Secrecy Act obligations, such as filing a currency transaction report for a transaction over $10,000. So these types of actions we've pursued people. The Southern District of New York filed AML failure to have AML program against BitMEX, which was a exchange platform. And in the Central District, we also prosecuted those operating Bitcoin kiosks, where you can go and exchange cash for Bitcoin and vice versa, for violating these statutes. So again, if you are dirty criminal A and you've been selling pounds of methamphetamine on the darknet, you have a lot of Bitcoin from that illegal goods. Where are you going to go to transmit it to dollars, either for your profits or to pay off your cartel source of supply? Are you going to go to Coinbase, which is now publicly listed and is asking for 10 forms of identification, inquiring the source of your funds? Or are you going to go to somebody who will charge you more, but will not ask for your ID, not necessarily meet you in person, and take steps to protect your identity? In the experience of criminal activity, they will take that second door. Now, obviously, in response to these prosecutions, people take more sophisticated steps, but at least that's where a lot of the early thinking was about taking these approaches towards money laundering and unlicensed money remitting.
So Anna, is there anything you want to add on to what Puneet was saying? Because what I want to do, I'm mindful of the time, and I want to make sure that we hit on SEC enforcement, which Keri's going to lead us the discussion on. Is there anything you want to add into what Puneet said before we pivot?
No, I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Thank you. That was a really good, succinct explanation of how the process works and how you're able to enforce where it wouldn't have thought enforcement was able. It still doesn't address some of the private ways that can be done, or just the direct exchange of services. So you've got all this Bitcoin. You can use Bitcoin now to pay for plane tickets and transportation and vehicles, and maybe, again, to non-reputable distributors of those services who use another conduit. But it just makes it a little bit tougher. But those methodologies allow you, if you follow the money, like we used to say, follow the money, you'll find the bad guy.
All right, Keri, take us away. Tell us about SEC enforcement. What are we seeing? What are we talking about? What's the enforcement mechanism? What's the landscape look like?
Well, as you know, Nina, this has been a fun and evolving area. I mean, maybe not as fun for some of our early adopter clients, but it's certainly been a cutting edge area of the law since, 2017, 2018. I was an SEC enforcement attorney back in the day, and I never saw an unregistered security where it wasn't a fraud case. People raising legitimate financing on legitimate projects knew how to do a private offering. There were lots of securities lawyers that could handle that. More sophisticated projects, you've got your whole Series A, Series B, you launch your IPO, like there's a formula. But you've got these early token adopters and blockchain projects, and initially they all thought that they were not subject to the securities laws and that these tokens were not securities. And I know that the SEC took a jaded view toward that, but really there were a lot of people, I think, who initially just did not see that coming at all. And so you've got Bitcoin launching in 2009, Ethereum launches in 2015. There's no enforcement. The SEC doesn't do anything. And so around this time, you've just got tons of projects that start launching, new blockchain developments. Some are just fraud. Some are real capital raising that's happening through tokens, and some are imitating Bitcoin and wanting to be more of decentralized projects where you actually had an open source project, like I described, kind of the Ethereum model, where really once it's launched, the network runs itself. And the original founders really are not continuing to manage it or run it like any typical business. And that really doesn't sound like capital. So, this created, a need for the law to evolve. The SEC still, Congress has done nothing, right? There's no new laws. The SEC really still has no formal guidance, but by regulating through enforcement, they've gradually taken more and more enforcement actions till where now we're in a space, I think, where things are not entirely predictable, but more predictable. Key events in late 2017 were the Dow report and the Munchie enforcement report by the SEC. Both of those, again, I was not in this space at the time, but my partner, Brian Klein, was. And I think both of those two practitioners in the field still felt like cases that involved more like equity. They were really an investment project. People were pooling their money to make an investment. And Munchie was just pretty much straight up capital. You give us this money and we're going to use it toward our project. The tougher cases were the Ethereum-like cases where you really had a blockchain that was going to be open sourced. And so the founders were going to be over here. The project was going to be over here. Where's the common enterprise in that? And so people are launching these projects, and then June 2018 is finally the SEC speaks. The head of Corp Fin at the time, the director Hinman, took a hard position, and at that point said Bitcoin and Ethereum were already kind of past the point of regulation. They really were decentralized. But everything else, they were going to apply the Howey test. And I think anybody kind of following this has now heard the Howey test. Nobody heard of it before, but we all now know it. 1946 Supreme Court case. And I think all the cases after that have been, how do you apply the Howey test? It really wasn't until April 2019 that the SEC issues not guidance, nothing formal, no regulations, but a framework for considering how to apply the Howey test. And so, for us as practitioners in the space, you're saying, well, we're like Howey, we're not an investment contract because it doesn't depend on the efforts of others. I mean, that is really kind of the primary focus of the test, whether purchasers are invested in a common enterprise with the promoters, and if profits are linked to the efforts of others. And for all the reasons I just described about the software, who are those others? Are the efforts linked to the promoters who issued it? Or really are just they linked to other people who may come and build on this blockchain? And in that area, we say it's not like a security at all. And there have been projects where the SEC did pass on, I think, or, didn't require maybe the tokens to be destroyed. Some they've treated like, a securities unregistered offering. They've taken the position that rescission is required, and that they've required all the tokens to be recalled. And there are some projects where people asked huge amounts of money for that. Some have settled, some have registered then, and I think we now have less froth about that space. People may have heard of Kik and Telegram. Those were huge knockdown dragouts between the SEC and those projects, and the SEC won summary judgment in both of those cases, and then they pretty much settled after that. We have had some that are still in existence and either have resulted in declinations or have managed to eke out some sort of settlement where the project could continue. I guess, with that, I'd say what happens now, there's one big knockdown drag out still. SEC is still fighting with Ripple, which is one of the original ones. And I think if you check your top 10 cryptocurrencies, Ripple would be on there. So we are all interestingly following that. I personally think that some appeals courts would be a lot more interested in the intricacies of the economic arguments around Howey than the SEC has been. But none of them, it's so expensive. And when those two cases lost summary judgment, that was really the end of it. And then going forward, I think, there are continuing to be cases around promotion, broker dealers. I mean, once you say something is a security or an investment contract, then you're discussing whether or not other aspects of the securities laws then apply to that. So you see some recent enforcement actions there. I think from a criminal, this is a criminal panel, so I guess I'll end on that. I think certainly we could see, further securities fraud cases charged where really you may want to argue about whether or not something is a security. I'm not sure that phase is totally gone. We may still have some arguments around that. it'll be a little cleaner going forward. And most cases do, as we talked about, more involve typical fraud motives. Without fraud, you hopefully at least could get a civil resolution.
Yeah. I wanted to, because it is a criminal panel, and criminal tax evasion is always an issue for white collar criminal practitioners. I mean, certainly something I've got several cases going on at the same time always. So Keri, I know I appreciate that overview of SEC enforcement, but would you mind touching base on what you're seeing in terms of IRS enforcement also? And then I want to turn to Puneet. We are fortunate to have Puneet with us from across the globe, and I want to talk about what you're seeing in the international space with respect to crypto and criminal law enforcement. But Keri, just give us, what are we seeing right now with the IRS? What are they doing?
We have a couple of criminal tax cases that are related to cryptocurrency in some way. And I think that enforcement area will continue to pick up. Originally, again, people really didn't know how to value these things, and they weren't worth very much. So, you wouldn't have huge amounts of, similar kind of capital gains to report when you sold your Bitcoin. And imagine, now these values have, quadrupled. They seem to do that every year. So, the IRS is now interested in making sure everybody reports their cryptocurrency transactions. And now that you are pushing the transactions from the margins of these, unlicensed money services businesses into more legitimate exchanges, those exchanges, then FinCEN takes the position, have all of the types of regulatory reporting requirements that go with, the AML laws. And so FinCEN has, I think, begun to crack down on these as well. We just saw somebody put in the chat about, needing to report foreign cryptocurrency over $10,000. That's the old FBAR that you have to file with your tax returns when you have, foreign currency. And yes, now they're also intending to apply that to cryptocurrency. We saw the John Doe subpoenas go out to Poloniex and Kraken recently, and those are to collect names so that, the IRS can begin to gather data just like it would, back in the old days. We still have, the gigantic bank investigations where they try to figure out who has money that's being moved and not reported. So, I definitely think once they start to get that data, we will see new criminal cases where the IRS is claiming that these were unreported assets and unreported gains.
Yeah, unreported income, right? Okay, Puneet, tell us what's going on around the globe.
Absolutely.
How's the world responding?
So one last way that when I defined what cryptocurrency was, that makes it different than depositing cash is the fact that you can move value around the world. This is different than bringing cash down the street. I can send cryptocurrency without any regulation or oversight in theory around the world, and they can cash it. So that does actually highlight some of the concerns and some of the benefits on the flip side. I think there's an economic reality of global access to finance there, but the concern is when it goes around the world for nefarious reasons. So the United States started working on these regulations since 2013. FinCEN, the SEC, the IRS. But in terms of the global problems of money laundering, as Keri mentioned, our Bank Secrecy Act was, somewhat in step with the rest of the world coming around international money laundering standards. And there's a body called the Financial Action Task Force that helps countries get on the same page, understanding the diversity of different laws in every country, but to have some uniform consensus about how to prevent the illicit financing of terrorism, for example. And so in 2018, the Financial Action Task Force under the US presidency added a separate regulatory chapter to virtual assets and put standards about how to govern virtual assets. Because given that cryptocurrency can go across borders so easily, what use is it if only the United States is regulating it? Someone can easily have regulatory arbitrage by exploiting other jurisdictions. So FATF is now monitoring how other countries are regulating these banks. Are they seeking to get due diligence? especially with cryptocurrency, at the fear of nerding out entirely, you could have cold wallets and you can have ways where you are your own financial institution. How do you regulate someone who is operating their own bank and potentially, again, funding Syrian mujahideen? And so the answer to this is one that FATF is getting global input on, is what's known as the travel rule. We apply it in the banking system, and they're trying to see, can you apply this in the virtual asset realm? So just to give a quick perspective, at least where I'm in the Middle East, Turkey a couple weeks ago had done this outright ban on cryptocurrency. But then a week later, just said, no, we're going to subject it to the AML CFT regime, the AML counter financing of terrorism regime. I can't completely bureaucrat everyone else out. So that's, you're seeing countries recognize that you need to have some regulation over this. In Kuwait, where I am in, just over the weekend, the Central Bank of Kuwait issued an advisory to customers about the dangers of cryptocurrency, whether it be fraud, the energy required to produce it, and the money laundering risks. One note about the international aspect is the Security Council of the United Nations has also encouraged countries to be aware of the money laundering risks and the illicit ends that cryptocurrency can serve. In the country of Bahrain, Bahrain is issuing licenses out for cryptocurrency development. So, I do want to end this on a more positive note, that I do think that countries are recognizing the growth potential and the economic advantages of fintech and cryptocurrency, but also recognizing that they need to regulate the risks appropriately. Similarly, the United Arab Emirates has a specific regime for licensing cryptocurrency firms and regulating those exchanges, similar to the United States. So we're seeing a global movement towards this, and I think that's a positive development because it allows technology to grow and it allows it to benefit economies, but at the same time, countries are being mindful of how to regulate the negative aspects of it. So that is what the Department of Justice is doing abroad. And it is in part what I am here in the Middle East working on, is countering terrorism and illicit finance in all new forms, which is in the most recent way of cryptocurrency.
So we have covered a lot of ground in an hour. We have, I think we've touched upon almost everything. We're out of time, unfortunately. It was a big undertaking to try to do everything in an hour, but I hope we shed some light on some questions. I hope we educated you. Please join me in thanking this amazing panel. And again, I'm Nina Marino. My firm is Kaplan Marino. We're in Beverly Hills. I neglected to tell you that at the beginning, but now I'm telling you. And thank you all so much for being with us. Check out the materials. I think you'll really like them. And everyone have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good night and good rest of the day.